welcome. My name is Su-Ling Ching, and it is my honor to be the President and CEO of the Ottawa Board of Trade, the voice of business and key advocate for growth in our nation's capital. We have a mission to cultivate a thriving, world-class business community, one that drives community prosperity and an inclusive, sustainable economy. Thank you for joining us today for Build Up Ottawa, our priority-setting interview with local candidates representing each party during the Ontario election 2022. Our purpose is to share the priorities of the business community with the candidates and ask about the priorities of each party to find alignment. We've been working with a team of members, volunteers, and business leaders led by David Coletto of Abacus Data and supported by Spark Advocacy to design the Build Up Ottawa 5 top priorities. You can learn more at buildupottawa.ca or ottawabot.ca. Today we are meeting with Joel Harden, NDP party candidate in Ottawa Centre riding. Welcome, Joel.
Well, thanks for having me, Celine. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you for being here with us. I just want to ask you first, what are your top priorities, Joel, for Ottawa?
I mean, for the NDP, we're the party that has always believed for business to succeed, and I come from a small business family myself. We need a strong social infrastructure, and that requires well-funded public services. It requires a government that's actually going to help business out, particularly as we've seen in the pandemic where we've lost so many important businesses to our downtown. I'm thinking in particular about 6 live music venues in Ottawa, real crucial cornerstones of our cultural space and artistic space lost in the pandemic. So we want to be a government that's there for business, but we also know, and I know from my own family's experience, that for businesses to succeed, we need a strong social infrastructure that brings people into our city and makes them want to take risks and start up businesses.
Thank you. Building business confidence is so important to our recovery. There's no question. Now, Joel, affordable housing, both market pricing and social housing, is a top issue for attracting talent, having an inclusive community and a competitive city. What are your party's plans to address this, both short-term and long-term?
I'm very thankful for the question. It's what I'm hearing at the doorstep the most is the affordable housing crisis in our city. We have the same overall plan you'll be hearing from all political parties because the Premier commissioned a study of experts who said the goal ought to be in the next 10 years building 1.5 million homes in the province of Ontario. So we join that. But because we're in the NDP and we've had the experience of being in government in the 1990s, a very important measure for us is making sure there's enough non-market housing available to folks that we can fix an affordable price at right away. So I'm thinking about the flourishing housing cooperatives in our city, our community housing stock, which is deteriorated because it's lacked investment. If you talk to Stéphane Giguère and the team at Ottawa Community Housing, they'll tell you, and I can tell you from firsthand experience knocking on those doors, a lot of residents are living in really lamentable conditions. But the good news is this: if we were to refurbish the community housing stock, the cooperative housing stock, if they were to have an active partner with the province of Ontario, we could create 250,000 non-market homes that would be affordable for folks. And the other thing for us is making sure that there's consistency and stability in the rental housing market. We have a gaping hole in our rental housing market in that when a tenant moves out of their rental unit right now, the current rent control laws that exist allow for the rent to go up by whatever the market will bear. And what that's led to, as Councillor Catherine McKinney said very clearly, for every one affordable housing unit we build, and the measure, by the way, of affordability is 30% of one's income. If more than 30% of one's income is spent on housing, that's an unaffordable unit of housing. But so for every one that we're building in our city, we're losing 7. And that's because our rent control laws are not really favorable to making sure there's consistency in pricing. So the NDP is a party that will ensure a fair playing field. We want to help landlords, most of whom I've met, want to do the right thing. We want to help tenants find a stable home. But we certainly don't want people to feel trapped in the homes that they're in, where they feel they can't move out of an ownership home or they can't move out of a rental home because there's literally nothing on the market available for them, not only in the downtown, but it is such that the market in the suburban and rural areas are also vastly becoming unaffordable. In the for ownership market, the NDP, for those families that can't afford to buy into this market, we want to offer people a 10% stake in the price of their home that will live on as something that the province can do on a very cost-effective model. And all of these things, in our opinion, Suling, what they add up to are efforts to cool off a highly overheated housing market. We have one of the most overheated housing markets in the Western world. So we want to work with all the stakeholders in the sector to bring in predictability, affordability, and making sure those who want that dream of home ownership, they can pursue that dream without breaking the bank.
I appreciate you making those comments, and it certainly is a multi-pronged approach that is necessary at this stage of the game.
Mm-hmm.
So, Joel, ensuring access to talent and labor in areas that have both existing and forecasted shortages is important, not just to business success and economic growth, but it is a complex issue. So what is sort of the top three things? It's complex like housing. What are the top three things that your party is willing to do to make sure that we don't fall behind?
Well, I'm really appreciative for this question, Suling. When I think about the shortages that we have in our labor market, in particular, thinking about the caring professions, you and I both know that our nursing homes were the hardest hit in the pandemic, and the working conditions in many of the for-profit big nursing homes are not where they need to be. We've had the Long-Term Care Commission that the Premier recently convened tell us that explicitly. So an NDP government, just like the NDP government in British Columbia, is going to ensure a wage floor of $25 an hour for personal support workers. If you can believe it, right now in for the local health information network for our health district, there is a 60% turnover rate for personal support workers in our city. They enter the profession and 60% leave within a year. That's because of the part-time, poorly paid nature of these positions. We've tried in the middle of the pandemic pay increases, but they're not permanent increases per se. There's a lot of unpredictability in this particular labor market. So an NDP government wants to make sure that there is a minimum floor for people who are doing that great work, looking after seniors and persons with disabilities. We have the same approach to early childhood educators, people looking after our youngest ones, the newest ones born. So when mom and dad want to get to work, taking advantage of the childcare plan the federal government's rolled out that we as an NDP government in Ontario would want to champion, we want to make sure that the folks working in those places make decent wages so they hold on to staff. Because staff churn is extremely expensive. So there's a $25 an hour minimum wage we're proposing for the early childhood educator sector. There's billions of dollars on the table from the federal government, so we know we can afford it. And then broadly speaking, we also know that when young people in particular want to pursue a career of their passion, of their calling, we have extremely high price tags for that. So we want to turn the Ontario Student Assistance Program, OSAP, from being a loan-based program, from being a grant-based program, with the objective under an NDP government making sure that no one graduates with debt at the end of one's post-secondary career, whether that's a skilled trade, working in the skilled trades, a community college, or a university. And I think this will be a revolutionary step forward for business too, because you're going to be dealing with folks who are not encumbered by tens of thousands, in some cases hundreds of thousands of dollars of student debt. And those folks are going to be able to be productive folks as a member of your company, as a member of your enterprise. And it takes a lot of stress, frankly, out of the labor market. It provides a lot of certainty to the labor market. And we can get into this further into our conversation, but also important to us to make sure that we deal with the shortages in our labor market is helping people and how they get around our city. A lot of people complain to me, even in the Zoom era, for those who have to get around for work, who can't just Zoom from their own home. It's tough to get around the city increasingly. We have to get the LRT right. I hope we can talk about the LRT in our conversation this afternoon. I've worked really hard as the MPP for this area in the last 4 years with the Conservative government to establish a public inquiry, which we are going to have into our LRT to get to the bottom of the deal that we signed so we can actually know the deal we signed, so we can get that train phases 1 through 3 fixed up and working to get people to work efficiently with as low a carbon footprint as possible.
Thank you, Joel. I appreciate you sharing all of that. The next question is about business and especially small business. And I know you and I got to chat a few times over the last 2 years as you've served the Standing Committee on Small Business as well and Economic Development. Those in the hardest hit sectors, they've been so challenged with the lack of revenue, with the accumulation of debt, now facing rising cost of doing business, supply chain issues, labor shortages, and meanwhile also having to grapple with new customer trends, digitization, markets. So, what can we do to drive business to inspire confidence, innovation, and mostly predictability for these businesses?
Well, I mean, key is keeping costs under control. And I think for one of electrical costs, which I'm worried about, to be honest, Ling, I'm worried about where we're going with electrical costs, because if you follow the news on the electricity market in Ontario, our nuclear capacity is being refurbished right now, being put on hiatus right now. And what that means is we're going to be utilizing more and more the gas-fired hydroelectrical plants in and around the Greater Toronto area. That is going to drive up prices significantly. Natural gas is not necessarily where oil is by way of price, but it's significantly more than what we're accustomed to paying. The Premier has talked about, his expert panel has talked about as much as a 600% increase in the use of those gas-fired electricity plants around Toronto. Also, from a health and environmental standpoint, I've talked to communities who live around those gas-fired electrical plants. Their kids play outside. The neighbors walk around outside that complain of respiratory problems, particularly asthma in youth. We have a solution to that in the Ontario NDP, which we believe will have an immediate impact for business because it reduces the cost of electricity. It's so simple. I'm going to try to point north here. I think this direction's north, the Ottawa River. Our friends over there in Quebec, their system of electricity is powered by hydroelectricity, water running through dams captured in electricity. And premier after premier in Quebec, Suling, has been begging Ontario to run transmission lines to Quebec to make sure that we could accept their power, which is a fraction of the cost of natural gas, a super fraction of the cost of nuclear, which will drive electrical prices down. It will help Ottawa Hydro make sure they can continue to build on our platform of consistency. But just to give you a sense of comparison, we're talking about 24 cents a kilowatt hour for nuclear power, 19 cents a kilowatt hour for gas-fired electrical power, and 5 cents for that hydroelectrical power from Quebec. With a $2 billion investment over 2 years, we could run those transmission lines, which former Premier Wynne pledged to do, but didn't follow through on. An NDP government would follow through on it, because you know what Quebec does when we don't do that, when we don't create a relationship to their power, they sell to the Americans at a loss because of the length of the transmission lines and the exchange rate of the currencies. So let's work with our friends across the other side of the Ottawa River. This is what we can contribute massively to help keep electrical prices under control. And then also, I think it's important that we think about the commercial rent market. I have heard from a number of small businesses who are really upset about rising commercial rent costs. And to some extent, it's been driven by the big influx of cannabis stores into our community who have, big investors who are able to pay top dollar for rents. It's driving commercial rent prices up. It's pricing a lot of entrepreneurs out of the market. So obviously cannabis is a legal product. People have a right to sell it, but we think cities have a role with an active provincial government to ensure that commercial rents stay at a reasonable level. So someone who wants to take a risk on a dream and bring a product to market doesn't have a huge hurdle to climb over at the start of that dream.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, tourism, hospitality, and food services are some of those businesses that were in the hardest hit sectors during the last couple of years, but they're so important as an economic driver in our region. What would your party do to help Ottawa as a gateway city in Ontario to remain competitive and support long-term economic recovery through the visitor economy?
Well, this is critical to Ottawa. I mean, that when we met in some of the multi-stakeholder meetings at the Finance Committee and small business tables, this is what Michael Wood was talking about. This is what Glenn Shackleton from Haunted Walks was talking about. This is what so many of the folks in the hotel and tourism industry were talking about. It has been really hard to watch the vibrancy of our tourism sector be literally on its knees without it's a collegial criticism, without enough support from the provincial government. I've seen other provinces do more. So we want to do more. It's been nice to see with the Tulip Festival, if you've been seeing the crowd, Suling, it's been nice to see the crowds come back. We know those folks are filling up our hotel sector. I'm really thankful that the industry has had that shot in the arm. I know that hotel providers are doing their utmost to make sure people are safe. So we are going to work as an active partner. If for whatever reason, and I don't have wood around me, but can we proverbially knock on wood for a second? Knock on wood that trends continue with the pandemic where they are. Let's make sure we can follow that path. But if things don't go well, we need a government right away to step in with some financial support. A lot of employees have been on furlough for a long time and have found jobs in other sectors. And that makes it really hard for the hotel industry to bounce back quickly. So yes, we'll be there. We'll be there quick. I'm thinking in particular, I'm not picking favorites in tourism, but I'm thinking particularly with the live music industry. Aaron Benjamin has been such a great advocate locally. We've got Blues Fest coming back this summer, Jazz Fest coming back this summer. It's going to bring a lot of people to our city, a lot of opportunities for our city folk in the fall. We want to be there as active partners to make sure people come back to the city. But I got to say, it has been great biking through Dow's Lake area and to see those crowds coming back for Tulip Fest. People are craving that social interaction and tourism, and the NDP will be an active partner for that sector.
I appreciate you saying that. And, even the direct economic impact of tourism is huge, but also tourism is a front door to all other kinds of economic development.
Absolutely.
Right? Like you come here to visit, and then you may come here to go to school or to invest here, those kinds of things. And it's not going to, I agree, it's so great to see the activity, but it's going to take a while for them to get back to where they were. We've lost some ground. So I appreciate you making those comments. Now, just a couple of rapid fire questions, mostly related to capital investments in Ottawa and building innovative infrastructure for our future. So how do you feel, you can say, do you support or not, and then make a comment if you wish, about finishing and funding phase 3 of LRT, connecting Canada and Barrhaven to the rest of the city? And we feel this supports our climate and our inclusivity agenda, as you referred to earlier, and makes the city more attractive to talent and to investment. So would you support that?
Absolutely, Celine. But the thing we have to know is the deal we signed with the Rideau Transit Group. It to me has been disturbing that I had to fight for 2 years, and I was the only member of provincial parliament in the city that was insisting that we have a public inquiry at the provincial or municipal level, or both, to make sure that the public knows what we signed. It's a major investment. As you said, it's a huge part of our local climate strategy. As I said earlier, I think electricity is another big part of that. But we got to get it right. How did we get a brand new train built with wheels that flattened, with 5 derailments? This has made a lot of neighbors feel unsafe. It's made a lot of employees of OC Transpo feel unsafe, and that's not the omen we want to go on. I would distinguish the NDP offer from my friends in the Liberal Party this way. I understand my friends in the Liberal Party want to offer $1 a transit ride for 18 months. We believe in consistent, permanent funding for public transit. We believe the province has to go back to the standard set in the past of funding 50% of public transit for every municipality in Ontario. So we don't just work on one aspect of transit, which is the cost, which is important for a small amount of time. I think municipalities, when I've talked to decision makers, they want a consistent partner in Toronto that will guarantee a stream of funding so we can work on the affordability of transit, work on having enough buses and trains en route. In the case of our LRT, making sure the thing actually works. And we know it works in all aspects of our year, particularly the winter. This was supposed to be a Nordic train, a Nordic Spirit train. Also important for us, Celine, for phase 3, the NDP really believes in Canadian procurement, Canadian jobs, Canadian enterprises contributing to the infrastructure development of our train. I've heard from different stakeholders that has not necessarily happened enough through phases 1 through 2, and that creates a lot of economic opportunity locally. It's disappointing to know there are at least, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there's at least 3 major lawsuits from subcontractors going on right now from phases 1 through 2. So once this LRT inquiry has run its course, I think we're going to know a lot more about what we've actually agreed to. The public will be informed. And absolutely, we can get to the table with an NDP government. It will be with 50% funding for all aspects of public transit so we can get our city moving again.
Thank you. I appreciate that. How do you feel about delivering the necessary capital funding to build the new Ottawa Civic Hospital campus? This, of course, will be a state-of-the-art facility and ensure that our growing population is well served and that we are healthy, as we all have seen is so important to our economy over these last 2 years, but also the ability to attract business. So are you in support of that as well?
So I think my friends at the Board of Trade will know that I'm the one politician at the provincial level of the city that has listened to the residents who are speaking out plaintively right now that they were not consulted enough, Suling, on this particular project. The first aspect of this project is a massive parkade right across from a UNESCO World Heritage Site, Dow's Lake, beloved jewel of our city, a 4-story above ground, airport-sized, like the Ottawa airport-sized parking garage for 2,500 spots. When the Dow's Lake Community Association and the Civic Hospital Neighborhood Association, disability advocates, environmental advocates, and Indigenous advocates were consulted by the Ottawa Hospital, they were told there would be space for 1,200 cars, and this parquet would be buried underground. There's, as you know, there's been a lot of controversy in our community about this not being the right spot, but I want to focus our conversation for a moment on the fact that community organizations, Indigenous organizations, disability rights organizations, environmental organizations were consulted and told one thing. And then at the 11th hour last summer in May, we learned actually we're going to do something completely different. And we're going to put a park, like a natural park, on top of the parking garage. And we're going to pull down 523 mature trees in the experimental farm. I can't even begin to tell you, Suling, how angry people are over the process here. I know great developers. And a key to great development is consultative development with real dialogue and real commitments that are adhered to. That has not happened in this case. So my colleagues in other parties have said, when I raise these questions, I'm fear-mongering or I'm going to delay the hospital by 10 years. That is not what the NDP wants to do. As you probably heard, our leader was in the press when she was in town recently. And her comments were, I need to understand what happened, because she's heard from me. I have asked those residents to write Andrea Horvath directly, write our health critic France Jelena correctly, so they can let them know, as much as they've let me know, how unheard they feel. The Ottawa Hospital is a crown jewel of our city. I love the work they do. My partner is a healthcare professional at CHEO. We need a new hospital, but the rush to build a parking garage across from a UNESCO World Heritage Site, I believe, is a huge mistake. We need to put the pause on this parking garage, reconvene all those stakeholders, have real community license for the project, so we aren't regretful of being in a rush. I want this to be an election issue. I think it will have huge impacts upon business if we prioritize a massive parkade in the middle of a massive climate crisis. This is not, in my opinion, Suling, the right move. We can quarrel over where the hospital should go, but this particular issue right in front of us, building this massive parking garage, I'm making an election issue. We're making an election issue because we think the public deserves to be heard, and they thought they were heard. Right. So we hope at the end of this local election, people will vote for the candidate who listened to them, who wanted to make sure that we did this the right way. So then we get this hospital, because you're quite right. We urgently need this hospital. I'm fully support of funding a new Civic Hospital. I just think the way we're going about it now is all wrong.
Okay, thank you. So you understand and appreciate the need, why it's important to our economy and our businesses, and the funding model you would support, but the consultative process and the decision making is what you're asking for.
Well, let me clarify further one thing. The funding model, as I understand it, for aspects of this hospital is a public-private partnership. So the NDP is not crazy about public-private partnerships, not because we dislike the private sector, not at all, but rather like in the LRT case, you lose transparency often because things become proprietary and the public doesn't have a right to know aspects of specific deals on major multi-billion-dollar investments. So the procurement model we prefer is when the government contracts with private partners to build hospitals through public procurement. We're not crazy about public-private partnerships, and that is part of the new hospital, so we're not a big fan of that. But most importantly, for you and folks watching from the Board of Trade, for whom I have a great deal of respect, we're doing this wrong right now. And we're going to live with the agony of a decision that was pushed upon communities for years if we don't push the pause button and get this right. And what I would do as an MPP for this area, as part of an NDP government, is bring people around the table, all people, making sure that they feel like they're heard, because I can tell you right now, they don't feel like they're heard.
Okay, I appreciate that. So we have just a few minutes left. I don't want to miss this last question. I want to ask you, why should business owners and leaders across the city vote for your party?
I love this question. Thank you for posing it. For me, I think the NDP is an ideal partner for business in Ottawa because we are going to create the infrastructure for you to succeed. I know the Premier likes to often say the infrastructure for the businesses to succeed is lower and lower taxes and further trimming from our public services. He and I very much part ways on this. I think when we have strong, well-funded public services, that is the way you attract employees into an economy. That is the way you attract success into an economy. We now have, for example, hospitals which have been constantly underfunded for years. Just the Civic Hospital we were just talking about a moment ago. In the mid-1990s, after we had the experience with NDP cabinet, that hospital had about 1,000 beds, Suling. Right now it has 500. It has 500. And our schools, so many of our schools, when I bike by them in Ottawa Centre, have portables in the back. Many of them don't have functioning HVAC systems. And there's a big difference in opportunity between the school my kids go to in Old Ottawa South, Hopewell Avenue, and W. Gowling School in Carlington, which is chronically underfunded because, the local neighbors can't raise, as our school did, $192,000 privately to build a new playground. I mean, that's just wrong. That is wrong. We should have strong, consistent public funding to make sure every school in every neighborhood is viable. The same for our healthcare institutions, not just hospitals, but community health centers. We need to make sure that there's access to family physicians in our city. There have been arbitrary limits that have been stopping doctors and health teams from forming family health organizations in Ottawa Centre. I'm on record about this, and I want to work on that. But when we have that strong social infrastructure, healthcare and education and other things, that's, to my mind, the genius of the Canadian model. I've talked to so many employers who've chosen Canada because of our healthcare system. They've chosen Canada because of our public education system. Despite the austerity both have had to deal with in recent decades, they're world leading. So let's make them even better. That's our attitude. We also have offers for small employers on universal dental care, universal pharmacare, which in our view end up saving the public a lot of money by keeping people healthy. But we take those costs off employers' balance sheets, particularly small enterprises that can't afford to pay for them on their own. So we know that success in Ontario comes through innovation. It comes through people taking risks. And as a son of a small business owner in Hawkesbury, Ontario, in Canada, that sent me to school, that fed me, I know how important it is to be there for small business, for those risk takers, by having a strong social infrastructure behind it.
Joel, I cannot thank you enough for your time today, for sharing your insights, and for the service you've delivered, and for putting your name forward again to be a leader in our community. We really appreciate that. We
appreciate you, Sue, and we appreciate all the work the Board of Trade did too to advocate in the pandemic for small businesses. It wasn't lost on me, and it wasn't lost on a lot of people who are living really tight margins month to month. So thank you for what you did too.
Enjoy the rest of your campaign, and I'm sure we'll see you again soon.
You bet. Take care, everybody.
Bye. So thank you so much to Joel Harden for speaking with us today, sharing the priorities of the NDP party and their thoughts about how to move forward. We encourage you to get involved by learning more about your local candidate and the alignment that they have to the Build Up Ottawa agenda, which again you can find at buildupottawa.ca. Leadership and policy do matter to the future of our city, and we have a great opportunity right in front of us to get involved and to shape our city today and for the next generation. Vote on June 2nd. Together, let's build up Ottawa. Thank you for joining us today.